Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a conflict that plays out pretty much everywhere you look, and maybe even inside our own heads.
Yeah, I'm talking about that classic showdown, faith versus reason. It feels like it's everywhere these days, right? As if you've got to pick a side. But do you? Is there maybe another way to look at this whole thing?
To help us think that through, we're going to turn to a pretty heavy hitter from the 20th century, a guy who spent his entire life wrestling with this exact problem. His name was Joseph Ratzinger.
Now look, a lot of people have a certain image of him. Maybe a bit rigid, a bit old-fashioned. But if you actually dig into his work, you find he was obsessed with this huge modern problem. The split between what we believe in our hearts and what we can, prove in a lab.
So, first up, a world divided. To really get what he was proposing, we've got to go back and see where he thought this whole split started. And for him, it all traces back to one huge, game-changing moment in history.
And that moment? It was the Enlightenment. I mean, this was a total revolution in thought that basically put human reason up on a pedestal and in the process completely rewired how we see the world.
Okay, Section 2, the limits of pure reason. So this huge shift, it brought some amazing things for sure. But from Ratzinger's point of view, it also came with a really big catch.
In Germany, they called it the Aufklärung. And the core idea was pretty radical for the time. The human reason, just our ability to think logically, was the only real source of authority. It was like a rallying cry to, dare to think for yourself.
And this is where Ratzinger's perspective gets really interesting. On the one hand, he was like, yeah, this was amazing. It freed people from superstition, it led to all this incredible science. But on the other hand, he saw a huge risk. By saying that the only thing that's real is what you can measure and test, you risk shrinking reality down. You end up with what he called a paralyzing skepticism about anything you can't, stick under a microscope.
So what happens? You get this massive split. Suddenly, faith is just a private, subjective feeling. And reason? That belongs to the world of cold, hard, objective science. And just like that, they're not partners anymore. They're enemies.
All right, Section 3, the meaning of logos. But here's the thing. For Ratzinger, this whole faith versus reason fight was based on a huge misunderstanding. The problem, he said, wasn't reason itself. It was that our idea of what reason is had become way, way too small.
So to fix this, he went way back to an ancient Greek idea, logos. Now this word is packed with meaning. It's not just logic or reason in a dry academic sense. For Ratzinger, logos is the creative, organizing, even loving intelligence that makes the universe make sense in the first place.
And that's the absolute key. We're not talking about some cold mathematical equation here. No, logos means that the reason behind everything isn't just a force. It's personal, it's creative, it's the very source of meaning. And this quote just nails it. He's saying that the deepest reason for why things are the way they are, and the deepest love that holds it all together, are actually the exact same thing. Mind-blowing, right? Okay, Section 4, faith and reason together. So, if you start thinking about reason this way, as this big, creative logos, it totally changes the game for how faith and intellect relate to each other.
Suddenly, they're not in a boxing ring anymore, they're dance partners. It becomes what he called a mutually enriching relationship. They actually need each other. Reason keeps faith from flying off into fantasy, and faith pushes reason to think about the big stuff, the questions that can't be answered with a calculator.
Think of it this way. Reason is like a reality check for faith. It's the guardrail that stops belief from turning into blind superstition or rigid fanaticism. Ratzinger was really clear on this. A faith that makes no sense isn't helpful. He thought it was actually a distortion of what faith is supposed to be. And it's absolutely a two-way street. Faith turns back to reason and says, hey, hold on, the world is bigger than just the data you can collect. It dares our logical minds to grapple with the really deep stuff, love, beauty, why we're even here, things science is amazing at describing, but can't fully explain the why of. All right, Section 5, a dialogue for today. So this is all fascinating philosophy, but let's get real. So what? Why does any of this matter for us, today, in the world we actually live in?
Well, for Ratzinger, this wasn't just an intellectual exercise. He thought that healing this split between faith and reason was the secret to a better world. It was the key, he argued, to getting past a kind of Western arrogance and actually having a real, honest conversation with other cultures.
And he wasn't just pointing fingers at one side. His warning was for everybody, for religious folks and for secular rationalist culture. He said both sides needed a big dose of humility. They had to be willing to listen and learn from the wisdom of other cultures, or else they'd just end up isolated in their own little bubble of pride.
So at the end of the day, Ratzinger's whole life's work was basically a plea to heal this deep split, a split that runs through our whole society, and for a lot of us, runs right through our own hearts and minds. It's an invitation to stop seeing faith and reason as enemies, and instead see them as like two wings of the same bird, both needed to fly towards the truth.
And that's the thought I want to leave you with. We live in a world that is just drowning in data, in information. But are we any wiser? So the question is, in this world, what would it actually look like for us to search for what's true using both our minds and our hearts?